Welcome to Crime Crazy, the weekly true crime podcast with Aaron Pline,
and Diana Seacon,
where we prove
that we know nothing about our legal system.
But we're still crazy for a good true crime story.
Yes, we are.
You didn't even roll your eyes.
I tried really hard.
You just rolled your eyes. That is the second time we've recorded this exact same sequence where I'm like, you didn't roll your eyes. And you're like, and roll your eyes.
I really thought I had worked on the eye rolling.
It's so funny.
Like, just in general.
Right.
Because I used to be an eye roller when I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know,
can be
just makes you look
rude.
like an asshole.
Right.
So I thought I had worked on it more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like before long we're going to need some statistics about how many episodes does Diana roll her eyes and get called out?
Well, how many episodes have we recorded together?
I mean, that many.
Right, like a lot.
A lot. But I don't know. I only just started noticing recently.
I don't know either. Maybe it's a new thing.
Maybe. But, I mean, you could have been doing it all along and I just didn't notice.
It could be.
Wow,
We'll
that was
know.
like a full minute of talking about whether or not you rolled your eyes.
I think we just peaked.
Yeah, probably so. I'm feeling a little punchy, Diana.
Tiny bit.
And it's not even all that late. It's concerning.
Well, we did a lot today. And by we, I mean you, because I definitely did not.
Oh, I did do a lot. I actually did a lot. And I went to Michael's. Also, I want you to know, and I want our listeners to know, because you all should feel very loved that I am here doing this with you when I have new craft supplies sitting 3.5 feet from me that I cannot use while I am recording an episode. So they're just sitting there.
Aww.
And I haven't gotten to use them yet.
She really likes us, you guys.
It's true. It's very true. There's even coloring stuff in there.
Oh, man.
The pointiest paintbrush I have ever seen in my life.
I bought a set of 360 sparkly gel pens, of which only about 180 actually seem to be sparkly gel pens, and the rest are just kind of awesome gel pens, and I've been coloring with those, and my life has changed.
I'm doing watercolor markers right now.
Ooh.
But then I bought some actual watercolors.
Ooh.
I know.
Maybe you should start painting things for our patrons.
Ooh. I've been drawing some octopuses.
Right.
They're all intertwined and tangled up and different colors. And last night I drew a ghost octopus. And they are so cute. They're like 2 inches tall. And they have kind of like ears. They're very cute.
Aww.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous that you can draw.
I mean, you know, it's not great. But it was a lot of fun. And you can tell it's an octopus.
Bullshit. It is great. They're fantastic. I've seen them. I can draw a stick figure.
I've seen your stick figure. And yes, you can.
His name is Pierre. I can also draw him a girlfriend and a dog and a cat and a flower.
Nice. There you go.
And that is all.
Everything you could ever need.
That's right.
We should play Drawing Without Dignity. Bad things would happen to Pierre.
Oh, God.
It would be great.
I can't do anything with Pierre. I can't move him. He doesn't make gestures. Like, it is literally a stick figure.
Mm-hmm. But does he have great hair?
No, he has no hair. He's a stick figure.
So it's not the Pierre we work with then?
No, but Pierrette sometimes has hair.
Oh, Pierrette.
Yeah, Pierre's girlfriend.
Wow.
And then there's Pierre Chat and Pierre Chien and Pierre Fleur.
Oh, my God. Oh, what it is like to live in Diana's head. So, our Pierre, Pierrette, Pierre Chat, Pierre Chien, Pierre Fleur, are they sponsors of Crime Crazy?
Oh, they should be. I'll need to get on that. But what I can tell you is that Crime Crazy is sponsored by Seb Bryce.
Woohoo!
Who does exist. I got a picture. Thanks, Seb.
I love it. Oh my God, Seb is awesome.
He is awesome. Courtney Ellis.
Woohoo! Wait, does she exist?
She does exist. I hugged her just days ago.
Okay. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So did you.
It's true. It's true.
And Dave Hatt.
And Dave Hatt, thank you, who I also have seen and met. And
Yes.
talked to in person.
Yes. It's true.
It's true. I love that. I don't know if it's still true, but for a long time, his Facebook profile pic was him in a top hat. So
I don't think it's anymore, but it was for a long time. True story. If you would like to be awesome like those three, you can sponsor us or just visit Patreon and, do whatever you feel like. $1, $2, $10. It's up to you.
150, 900.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have levels for that, but we'll make something up. It's cool.
You could probably get lots of stuff from us, actually, at that level.
That sounded
really bad. I was thinking like my children, but only because the little one has endless energy and has literally been bouncing for like 12 and a half hours a day.
Oh, God.
It's a little exhausting.
I'm tired just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe not to the point where Erin will send you her youngest.
Probably not.
But whatever you feel like. And if you don't feel like making a monthly commitment, that's cool. Just buymeacoffee.com. I've not yet come up with a graceful way of getting to that one.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
So yeah, there are the places you can give us money. You can also give us reviews.
Yes.
Which are like money, but with words.
I mean, yes. And it makes you awesome.
I'm way too punchy for this. And makes you awesome. And if all you want to do is check out how awesome we are on all the social medias at crimecrazypod.com.
That's right. Really? We are on all the social medias at crimecrazypod. And you can visit us at crimecrazy.com.
I really fucked this one up, didn't I?
It was a little rough. I get it. Like, this is all brand new information that you've never had to say out loud before.
Right. Certainly that's the problem.
Yeah. I'm leaving all this in when we edit, too.
Of course you are.
That's the cost of me doing the editing.
It's true. It's true.
I get to tell whatever story I want.
Haha.
Speaking of telling things, have you learned anything this week you'd like to tell us about?
Ooh, I did.
What did you learn?
There is a place in America that you can get away with murder.
What?
Yeah.
I would like to never go there. Where is this place? And what the hell?
It is called the Yellowstone Zone of Death.
What? Right.
And while it's not a lawless place per se, it's impossible to be tried for a crime there.
Why?
So I'm just going to read this from Wikipedia because I could not think of a shorter way to go about it.
Okay.
So here we go. The court district governing Wyoming is currently the only court district in the U.S. to have jurisdiction over land in other states. This is due to the fact that all of Yellowstone National Park, which includes parts of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, is part of the Wyoming Judicial District.
Okay.
Any criminal discovered to have committed a crime in that district would usually be brought to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where the court for Wyoming District is. However, the Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution decrees that a trial must happen both within the district and state of where the crime was committed. Because of this, a crime committed in the zone of death would be constitutionally required to be tried in and include only jury members from the zone.
Okay.
However, that part of Yellowstone in Idaho is uninhabited, and a jury cannot be assembled, and the criminal would be unable to have a fair trial, meaning that they cannot receive any legal punishment for major crimes.
I mean, is this like you're not allowed to walk your alligator without a leash in Florida on Fridays, and actually you would still go to prison?
No, this is true. People can do whatever they want. They can't be tried. It's in violation of the Constitution.
Yikes.
Right. So as far as we know, And especially since we talked last week about how it's much safer in national parks than in
Right.
general. There have been no felonies committed in the zone of death, but one guy did illegally shoot an elk in that zone, and he tried to use the paper that first laid out why the zone of death was the way it was to avoid trial. The judge didn't agree, and the man pleaded guilty instead of going to trial.
So it is a little bit like that. Like, it's technically, but they still will do something about it? 'Cause it sounds like the judge was like, yeah, that's not a thing.
So I don't know. It seems like it was relatively undiscovered that this anomaly existed.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a law student, or maybe he was a lawyer, but somebody wrote a paper talking about he had decided to look and see if there was any way that you could actually get away with murder, thinking, of course not. And it turns out there's this little bit of area that has kind of the sweet spot. The court is in a different state. Mm-hmm. And there are no inhabitants in that zone, so you can't put together a jury.
That's terrifying.
Well, it is, but again, it's pretty remote. People aren't really there. I suspect that the guy pleaded guilty to hedge his bets.
Right.
He's probably right. It may have been overturned on appeal, but is that the hill he wants to die on for illegally shooting an elk?
Right.
He's not a constitutional scholar. He's a hunter.
Right. Those things generally don't go hand in hand.
Not necessarily, but, I mean, it was an ingenious argument. It was worth trying.
Yeah. Yeah.
But...
Well, I would like to still never go there. I just talked about how I camped out in Yellowstone last week, Diana. I didn't camp out last week. I talked about it last week, but still.
Well, right. Well,
what if I was in the zone of death?
You weren't. It's really remote.
Oh, yeah. Definitely we drove where we were, so.
And also, I fucking told y'all not to go into the woods.
Yeah, but that was after I went camping.
Well, that's true.
I didn't even know you then. I was only 16.
Oh, and I was like 60.
Oh, like 68?
Somewhere in there. Math is hard when you're this old.
It's true. Your brain is like practically dust.
Practically?
Literally?
Entirely. Erin.
Yes.
Last week on Crime Crazy.
Yes. Last week on Crime Crazy, we finished up with the fourth set of victims, number 7 and 8. Actually, 5, 6, 7, and 8 of the Colonial Parkway Murders. And in order to just continue this thread in the most obvious and easy way possible, we're going to talk about the Colonial Parkway Murders again today.
So can we have just a quick recap of all 4 sets of victims?
Yes, I think that would be a great idea because we're going to get into some details today. So, starting in 1986, October of 1986, Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Ann Dowski, who were 27 and 21, were potentially camping on the Colonial Parkway when they were murdered. Their bodies were found in the back of Kathy's car, one in the back seat and one in the sort of trunk of the hatchback. The car had been shoved over the edge as if somebody was trying to get it down into the river and had gotten stuck, and then they had been doused with diesel, which we learned is not easily flammable. Mm-hmm. And there were some cigarette butts. They were somebody attempted to light them on fire. They did not burn, and they were found there. But of course, when they were found, the responding officers broke open the back window of the car because they thought that maybe it was an accident with fatalities. Maybe there were survivors, and destroyed a ton of evidence. Then, a year later, September 1987, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, who were 20 and 14 and had only met that night, were for some reason out in the middle of the night together in David's black pickup truck. And they were found in an area known as Ragged Island, or actually the car was found abandoned in an area known as Ragged Island. And like Kathy's car, everything was still in it. This time the door was open, the car was on, the radio was playing, the wipers were going, and the people were gone. And there were tons of clothes inside the car. The bodies were found a little while later, several days later, actually by David's dad. He found his son. They were washed up on the shore of the York River near the car. Some joggers had come across Robin's body, and they had both been killed with a gun, execution style, although David, it appeared, had tried to escape and was shot in the shoulder before he was shot in the head. Then, the next episode, so that was 2 weeks ago, last time we talked about Cassandra Lee Haley and Richard Keith Call, Keith, who were CNC students, who had gone on their first date. Didn't go well. They came home together. They left the party they were at 1:30 a.m. Somehow, even though it was completely out of their way, their car wound up on the Colonial Parkway. All of their clothing was inside, door open, key sitting on the seat, wallet out. And for a while, the police thought that maybe they had gone out and gone skinny dipping and drowned in the river. They brought dogs who did follow the scent to the river, but no one ever really believed that they had gone skinny dipping because it was really cold. Neither of them have ever been found at all. And then finally, the fourth victims, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. They were a guy and then his little brother's girlfriend. Big brother's girlfriend? Don't actually remember. Sorry. And they were on a trip from Newport News to Virginia Beach, which is a trip that takes you east about an hour and a half or so. They were supposed to go and visit the rest of the Lauer family, but they never arrived. Their car was found at a rest stop that was kind of on the way, except it was going the wrong direction, and dogs couldn't pick up their scent at all, leading investigators to believe that maybe they were never actually at that rest stop, even though the car was there. The car, like the previous two, was open, unlocked, window partially down, wallet out, keys in the ignition, and they couldn't find the owners at all. But then about a month later, the bodies were found in the woods by some hunters who were hunting off of a logging road. They were pretty much decomposed, almost skeletal, and Anna Maria's body was covered with an electric blanket, which had been in Daniel's car when they had left that day. Cause of death was never satisfactorily identified.
Did they have any inkling at all? Like, probably not a gunshot.
Probably not a gunshot, no bullets. The closest they got was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian who found the nick on Anna Maria's finger and said that maybe there had been a knife involved and she had been trying to fend off the attacker, and that's how she had gotten the cut all the way on the bone of her finger. Mm-hmm. But that was it. That was all they knew. Yep. So this week, we are going to talk about theories and suspects and things that have happened since the late 80s in this case. And as promised, this will be really frustrating because there is no answer. It has never been solved. We don't know who the killer was.
I think the actual frustrating part that we talked about last week is we have all the information we need.
Potentially. Yeah. And we'll talk about that too, because that is a very, very recent development that there's DNA in these cases. And we'll talk about that. So first I want to go back to 1990. So in 1990, there was a little bit of a revival in the case, and the police and the FBI came back out, they revisited it, and they were asking for tips. And they got so many tips. Hundreds and hundreds of tips came in. People really, really cared about this case. It was one of the bigger cases to ever happen in Virginia. It was unsolved. At this point, like, it had touched the lives of a lot of people in some of the biggest cities in the area. So Newport News, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Gloucester, Williamsburg, all of that area right there. There's a ton of military. There are schools, there is a lot of history, there's a lot of tourism. Like, this is all very important to Virginia culturally. And so it was something that people wanted to talk about, and they wanted to help with, and they wanted to be involved with, and they wanted to see it solved. But as with most tips, almost all of them are just throwaway, right? So people were worried about their neighbors, or they suspected their brother or their cousin or their coworker or their friend. One tip that came in was actually a police officer who was pretty sure the murderer was his partner because something was off with him.
Okay.
Yeah, which, I mean, that was about the only evidence that he had. But to be fair, there has always been the suspicion that law enforcement was involved because so many of the cars were found with windows down, with no sign of a struggle in the vehicle at all. Usually the driver's identification, their wallet or their purse or whatever, was very near the driver's side door, as if somebody had been handling it, just prior to the disappearance or the death or the murder. And so it's entirely possible that all of these people were pulled over, or they had been parking and an officer came up behind them, or, something happened that involved law enforcement or somebody pretending to be law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one promising tip. A man in his 30s. He was known to hang out at Ragged Island and along the Parkway. He was in a relationship that ended really badly just before the first murders. Mm-hmm. He had a history of abuse as a child and mental health issues. And in fact, between the first and second sets of murders, he had spent a bunch of time in a mental hospital, and he was released one day before the second murders were committed. The very night that Keith and Haley disappeared, some of this man's friends or acquaintances had seen him acting strange and erratic and just really, really off. And I guess this would have been like the day he got home from the mental hospital. So I feel like that's fair. Yeah. And by the time this tip came in, he had left the country without any explanation. So, yeah, super, super suspicious. Meadows and Latrell and Johnson were three of the investigators that were handling the case, and they tried to get all the information on this man that they could, and they tried to get medical records and mental health records about the suspect, but of course, you can't just do that, and so they were blocked by doctors. And in fact, Meadows spent over a year trying to get fingerprints and hair samples and other things from just any source that he could, primarily doctors, which was sort of the issues, or like medical facilities, sort of the issue, because he couldn't. Finally, he gave up on the person being a suspect. And so I wasn't able to find the article that I was reading. Like, this was super, super fascinating. I think it was in the Virginia Pilot. But it didn't say whether he gave up on him because he wasn't able to get any information. It sounded like he decided this guy wasn't a suspect, so maybe he was able to get fingerprints or something that or an alibi or something he felt cleared the man. So, there was also a man in Canada who seemed like a really likely suspect for a while. He'd lived in Hampton Roads, which is the name of this area, and had even committed at least one sexual assault there. And now, in Canada, he was a suspect in a murder where a woman had been abducted from her car, taken into the woods, tied to a tree, and burned to death.
Oh.
So it seemed really, really promising. However, the Canadian authorities ended up convicting another person of that murder, so they found who actually had done it. This guy was no longer a suspect, and so now all he was a guy who had once raped someone in the general area where these murders had taken place, and so no longer a very good suspect.
Well, and not a very good suspect to begin with, because we don't have any sort of evidence that there was any sexual assault involved at all. True.
Although there doesn't seem to be any sexual assault in the murder they thought he did in Canada either. So I guess that you could make the argument that a long time ago he raped someone, then he realized what he really wanted to be was killer.
But why not both?
It's true. Well, we don't, to be fair, have any evidence that the killer or killers didn't assault the other 6 victims.
Right.
We just are relatively sure they didn't assault the first 2.
Right.
Although, let me go to that really quickly. So they did do a rape kit on Kathy and Rebecca. And this is something that I read a million years ago. So I'm going to need to verify it before I tell you that is absolutely fact. But what I remember is that they did a rape kit, and the FBI held on to it for a while untested. They didn't find any evidence of rape, but I guess they eventually destroyed the DNA because it didn't get tested, and the FBI was like, yeah, well, I guess we don't need this anymore. Yep. So I guess they destroyed the rape kit. I don't know that there was any DNA that wouldn't have been the girls, but
Yeah.
yeah. So the trio of investigators, and of course there were a lot more investigators on this. These were just 3 that were primarily on the team. They also had to investigate a bunch of police officers because, like I was saying, that was always a suspicion and continues to be a suspicion, that it was either a cop or several cops or someone pretending to be a cop, rolled down windows, lack of struggles, IDs and wallets out in the open, nothing taken from the car, somebody
Right.
that might, especially if it's somebody that was only pretending to be a cop, like wanting that power and getting it by killing people. Pulling them over and killing them. So in late 1990, they found a man on Interstate 64, and it sounds like he was not in a vehicle, but he was walking along, or he was on the side of the road, and he had a pair of handcuffs on his belt. And so they stopped him and questioned him and looked on his person and looked through his vehicle, and they found he also had a fake police badge and a red flashing light that he could put on the top of his roof to make his car look like an unmarked police car. And a criminal record for sexual assault. And so they were pretty darn certain this was their guy, except he had been in prison during 3 of the 4 dates of murder.
That does cut down on one's availability to be murdering.
It does. It really, really does. So this was 1990. There was still investigation. This case is still open even today. But the next really big thing that happened was in 2010, when no real progress had been made. So the families reached out and hired retired Milwaukee PD homicide detective Steve Spingola. Maybe Spingola. Probably should look that up. So he'd been a featured detective on a show called Cold Justice, and he had a nationwide reputation as an excellent investigator who was very successful and could solve all sorts of things, whether it was in his jurisdiction or not. And so he seemed like someone that would be very, very helpful, and they invited him in to look through all the files, to visit the crime scenes, to see what could have possibly been missed. So he did. He looked into the case. He talked to family members. He received and reviewed tips. He talked to original investigators. Of course, it got a lot of attention because he was a pretty famous person in this area. And so there were lots of tips that came in. And he had pretty good access to people that he wanted to talk to. And then in August, so 3 months later, he published his findings in a 29-page magazine article called Predators on the Parkway. A former homicide detective explores the Colonial Parkway Murders. And I have read this document. And the gist is that he didn't believe there was a Colonial Parkway serial killer or a team of Colonial Parkway serial killers. He believed that most of the murders were unrelated. So he thought that the first pair, Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, were killed by the same killer as these other 2 victims, Lolly Winans and Julie Williams, who were a pair of victims found in 1996, so a decade later, with slashed throats in the Shenandoah National Park, which is it's like a similar kind of area, but it's 180 miles from the parkway. It's out to the west in the mountains. And so, there were a lot of similarities between these 2 cases. But, I mean, the cause of death or the MO and everything like that makes a lot of sense. But there was such a distance and such a time difference that I personally think it seems unlikely, although he does have a ton more experience than me.
Well, and not... none of those things are particularly unique.
No. I agree. Yeah. So he talked a lot about like all the different killings. All the rest of them he thought were unrelated. And the families on the whole were not terribly happy with the investigation. And I actually did reach out to Bill, but kind of last second. So I haven't heard back yet, but just to find out kind of what his thought was, because he's quoted a lot in this article. He's always been one of the more active people in this case that have really been advocating for, something to be done. And so I think his name is out there a whole lot. But I was really interested in hearing what his thoughts were, because from what I've read, it sounds like on the whole, this just didn't feel right. It just didn't really answer the questions. It certainly didn't identify any suspects or anything like that, but or it didn't identify anyone that was eventually arrested. But also, they seemed to think that Spingala focused on some things that were not necessarily important and got distracted by details that just didn't really make a ton of sense. But the other thing they were really annoyed with, and this one I fully agree with, was that Spingala profited considerably from this article. So he didn't just create a report and give it to law enforcement or the families. And I think this was the deal all along, but he published it in a magazine and made a bunch of money from it. And his answer to this was that's how he funds what he does and his investigations, is that he publishes articles, he makes money, then he's able to travel and ask questions and spend time and all of that kind of stuff, which, yes, and he made a lot of money on an article instead of being helpful.
Right.
So, there was another disagreement in all of this, which was about a note that was uncovered during the investigation. Although even that there's disagreement about, because I think it was the families said, and I didn't write this down, but the families said that the note was given to investigators initially during the first investigation, but then investigators said they didn't remember such a note. I guess maybe it wasn't in their records. But either way, this note was uncovered, and it apparently implicated a person of interest. So basically, it was a note written by one of the girls, and it said that it had the name of someone. It was by, so it was a note in Robin's handwriting, I believe, and basically it was talking about going to meet someone and potentially buy drugs, is what they thought it referenced. And that Spingala believed that it was a really good clue that would have explained why they were where they were in this like rough area, and then that it might prove that like they got into a situation where they were being robbed, or like something had gone wrong with a drug deal, and then she mouthed off, and this was the one I think I referenced in the first one about people being really cruel. It was terrible. Spingala was basically like, here's what I think happened. They went there and they were buying weed, and then they were being robbed by the drug dealers, and then Robin, who was really sassy and just a troubled child, must have said something mouthy and it got them both killed. And it was just awful, right? So investigators didn't really put a ton of value to this note. Like, they didn't think that it really mattered. Probably primarily because if all of these cases are connected, who cares what one of them wrote about a note? It's really unlikely that all of them wound up in that situation.
Right.
But Spingala made a big deal of it. He said it was very significant, and he even in his article described the vehicle of the suspect, and it's a very kind of vague description. It's like the color and the kind of car it is or whatever, but still, like, he put a ton of emphasis on this, and maybe in a really inappropriate way, especially since this person was never charged with any crime.
Right.
So then there is the person that I have always wondered about. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts. And I was really interested to hear thoughts from the families and from the press and that kind of thing, because it seems like this person's pretty much discounted as a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't know if this was a crime novel or an episode of Criminal Minds, this guy would totally be the killer. So, Fred Atwell. So, on August 31st, 2011, Fred Atwell was arrested for robbing a woman at gunpoint in Roanoke. He told her he had been living in the woods and he was hungry, and he made away with less than $100 and was then arrested almost right away.
Mm-hmm.
And imprisoned. So Atwell has always been tied to the Parkway cases as well. And he's been a suspect more than once, and I don't know that I would discount him. So back in 2009, Atwell claimed to have been contacted by a friend at a security company. He said that his friend wanted him to teach a class about the Colonial Parkway Murders because he had been a deputy in Gloucester at the time and knew all about the cases. And Atwell was like, really don't know a ton about the cases, so I think I'm going to pass. And the friend said, but no, wait, before you make this decision, let me tell you what I have, and I'll let you see them if you agree to come and teach this class for me. And what he had was over 80 crime scene photos that had been taken from the Norfolk FBI files on the Parkway murders.
Holy shit.
And he, had been using them or was planning to use them to teach this class. So Atwell came and he looked at the photos and verified that's what they were, and he made copies of them. Now, all of that is what Atwell says, and he's a pretty untrustworthy character, so it's possible that he got the photos and distributed them, or that, there's all kind, take it with a grain of salt. So Atwell says that he then called the FBI and reported that these photos were out there, and they wouldn't call him back, wouldn't give him the time of day.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, he was always from the beginning overly involved in everything, and a pest, and not a reliable character, and just kind of weird. So I don't know that I would have called him back either, but he says he was really frustrated that he couldn't get justice, and so he went to Channel 3 News, and he told them, hey, I have these photos. I've called the FBI and let them know. Let me send some to you. They called the FBI to say, hey, did you know about this? And of course, the FBI responded immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Atwell says it was only then that the FBI came to him, and they came and they say they have gotten all of the photos back, the originals and the first set of copies and the copies that Atwell made. So, of course, the families were super, super, super upset about this because why wouldn't you be? Plus, there's the concern that this in some way could damage the case. Like now, maybe information the police were keeping quiet, in order to try to get a confession out of somebody or whatever is now out there. And it's just this huge violation of privacy. Photos of their loved ones after horrific things have happened to them. But the upside of all of it was that the case, which at this point was 25 years cold, received this resurgence of interest. And that is always helpful with cold cases. In fact, that is going to be part of our call to action today, because it really puts pressure on law enforcement when it's getting a lot of attention in the media and in the public for them to do something and solve it. So in 2010, so the next year, Atwell contacted Bill Thomas, brother of the first victim, and some of the other families, and he said that he had been contacted by this attorney who said he had a client who was guilty of all of the murders, and if they would send $20,000, the attorney's client would give locations of Keith and Cassandra's bodies.
What the fuck?
Right? So, of course, they didn't, because they are not
idiots.
Yeah. And he got crazier and crazier about it, and then eventually, this was in January, and several months later, he sort of gave up the story. Then the next year, early in the year, Atwell came up with a scheme to raise some money for the families. And this one I think we've talked about. So he decided they were going to raffle a car.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the money would go into the Colonial Parkway Victims Fund, or Murder Victims Fund. I forget what the title was. And, the only thing that he would need is, like, he would donate the car. He would handle everything. And then I think there was a boat involved at one point too. And then he needed some money for DMV to get tags and pay fees and all that kind of stuff, right? And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So they did this event. The car was there. People bought tickets. They raffled it off. There was a winner. At the end of the day, Atwell collected all the money, and they're not sure how much of the raffle money he stole. But there was no car. The car he had borrowed from a dealership, so he returned that. And there was no car for the winner. And then he cashed a $270 check that was supposed to go to DMV, and he just pocketed that money and disappeared. So once he had done that, he called a suicide hotline and said that he was a major suspect in a serial killing case, and he was suicidal and he wanted to commit suicide by cop. And he did not do those things, which is good only because some poor cop would have had to shoot him and live with the fact that he took a life.
What a fucking narcissist.
He's crazy. So it has always been, I think it's just fact, but at least popular belief that Atwell at least knew something about the case that he wasn't telling anyone, because he would just insinuate himself into the investigation over and over and over again. He'd get close to the families. He really liked the attention that he could get from it. Like, he didn't mind being a suspect because it meant he was getting attention. He didn't mind, like, ripping off the families. He didn't care about them at all. At first, they thought that he was just a well-intentioned local officer, deputy, which in this case just meant, like, someone was like, hey, do you want to be a deputy? And he said, sure. That was it. But then, of course, as things went on for decades and he got sleazier and sleazier, they didn't believe that anymore. But whatever he may have known, we will never know, because this past December, he died in prison.
Fuck.
Yep. I think he had, like, kidney failure or something like that. I forget what. It was some medical something, so, like, natural causes. But now no one can ever ask him anything. Yeah.
That whole, like, insinuating himself into things just smells guilty.
I know. Over and over again. And got a hold of crime scene photos and made copies for himself, and, like, was always talking to the families, and just really, I think either way, he's a terrible human being, or was a terrible human being.
Yeah.
But also pretty darn good suspect, in my opinion. But
well, yeah, and we've seen that kind of behavior before with criminals. A lot of folks that set fires stick around to watch it burn.
yeah.
We have Eddie Kemper, who wanted to be a cop but couldn't, so just hung out with the cops.
Right.
And went on ride-alongs because there's no way old Eddie Kemper could have done all this.
Right.
It's
So,
not unusual.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like, he seems like such a great suspect. There must be something we don't know as to why he wasn't charged. Because it wasn't like he was protected by being a police officer. Because other officers were investigated. There were other organizations involved, like the FBI, who could definitely investigate a local, not even quite a cop. And he wasn't particularly favored. Like, no one liked him for very long. It wasn't like they would have done him a favor and not investigated. So there must be something about an alibi or his ability or something that makes him a less good suspect. I mean, or that's just another example of how things got totally fucked up.
Well, and I almost lean that way. It doesn't seem like they ever looked real hard.
Yeah. It's interesting because on the one hand, there were so many mistakes made along the way. Fingerprint cards lost, DNA destroyed, cars like busted, crime scenes just totally destroyed. Like there were all these things. On the other hand, half of the articles that I've read have been sort of from the point of view of these detectives and FBI agents, and they seem just gutted that they can't solve this. And there's always, like, it's still an open case. There aren't a ton of people actively working on it, but at least it is occasionally being actively worked on.
Right.
So I don't know that everybody working it was inept. I think that's probably an overstatement, but
but it's hard to know.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose just being in general a fucking creeper and getting too close to things doesn't mean anything. Right.
But I mean, he would have had a firearm, and he would have had a car with lights, and he would have had, enough to pull someone over, even though it would have been outside of his jurisdiction. And he was always there. Like, he fits a lot of it. So I don't know. So that kind of brings us to today-ish. Right now we're over 30 years out. The cases are still considered active, but there hasn't been a ton of progress made. However, in 2017, like near the end of 2017, the families and media were told that there is testable DNA that they think is perpetrator DNA in 3 of the 4 cases. But either this DNA has yet to be tested over a year later, or the results are for some reason not being shared, because even the families have not heard that it has been tested or if it connects to anybody.
It's been like almost 2 years.
Yes. Yep. But remember last week we talked about over 100,000 rape kits haven't been tested either, and those perpetrators might still be active, whereas this guy or guys, they've never done anything since the late 80s. So other than public interest in the case and pressure from families and pressure from media, like, there's not a good reason to prioritize it because no one's in danger.
That is unsatisfactory.
Agreed. Last thing is really that one of the things that's always been sort of a point of discussion is how many people were the killers. So all the way from, are these 4 cases actually related? There are some huge similarities, especially with the last 3, but there are also some huge differences. Different kinds of murder, like instead of progressing from killing from a distance with a gun to strangling and slitting someone's throat, it bounced all around. The bodies were discovered in all different kinds of places. The cars were very similar, but even the location, and in one of the cases it was 30 miles away, which is significant. But also, if they are all related, there's a lot of discussion about whether this was one person who maybe had a gun and used that to control his victims, and maybe even that, like, mask of authority being an officer or someone that was pretending to be a police officer. Or was it more than one? Was there a guy with a gun and then the guy that did all of the tying up and the, whatever else? And that's entirely possible too. Because if you remember, like in the first case, the bodies were moved. And
right.
I mean, they were girls, and they were not very big girls, but like a body is heavy. My 6-year-old is heavy.
Right.
So, and the car was shoved over the edge of the like embankment, and so it definitely could be more than one killer. It could potentially be a ton of different killers.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, there's not any evidence. Well, there's no proof that Keith and Cassandra were murdered at all. Like, the bodies have never been found. Weird shit happened, and weird shit happened with the car even that morning, but
yeah, we have no idea where they are.
Right. So that kind of leads into my call to action this week, which is similar to the first one, which is just these kind of cases, especially when a serial killer stops killing, whether they actually stopped killing, which may or may not be a thing, or whether they died or moved or, I don't know, were imprisoned or got sick or whatever. When there's nothing happening, there's no active threat. They just go cold. And the only way that they ever get solved is if people put a bunch of pressure on law enforcement to solve this case. And the only way to do that is to have just a ton of knowledge and a ton of interest and a ton of attention given to the case. So my call to action is to just read all that you can about this. There are so many articles. There's a fictional book based off of it. It's it's like a Patricia Cornwell, what is her name?
Cornwell, I think.
One of those.
Something
you can
like
tell
that.
I read a ton of books. No, but in that one it is solved, but not in real life.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot. The Special Kind of Evil is a book written by an investigative journalist and his daughter about this case, and it's pretty darn close to factual. I mean, there's some liberties taken with some of it, and a little bit of information is a little skewed, but it is also so wonderful in the way that it treats victims and their families. Like, it really, really focuses on them and not, how exciting or what a spectacle the case was or the murderer or whatever. And it's a very, very good read. It's well written. There is, of course, the Facebook page. It's Colonial Parkway Case, but you can also search Colonial Parkway Murders and it'll come up. And then there are a couple other Facebook pages that you can get to from there as well. So some of the other families run some other pages with information. So this case especially, because it is near and dear to my heart, but also really any cold case. That's how it works. That's how it gets solved.
Mm-hmm. And we'll post links to the things that you talked about in our show notes and on social media this week. So if you'd like to get involved or learn more, we have all sorts of resources for you.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have any advice for us?
I mean, just stay out of the woods again.
Again? I like that that's the advice again.
Just stay out of the woods. Only pull over in well-lit areas.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's still a thing, right? Like, the Colonial Parkway murderer or murderers probably isn't going to get you, but you can put your blinkers on or your hazards on and drive slowly until you're in a place you're comfortable pulling over.
Yep, absolutely. And you should.
You should.
And then you should call your people.
Yes, absolutely. Not while you are driving or pulling over, because that might be what got you pulled over in the first place.
Right, yeah, it's like super legal in a lot of places now.
It is, which is good. But yeah, call your people.
And don't end up on next week's episode.